All right, we're ready to cover our cake in fondant, and the best way to do that is to make sure that you start out with a nice smooth surface, non-porous surface. We discussed in an earlier video that if you do not have a semi-non-stick surface that you're working with, like laminate countertops or corian, you might want to use a silicone mat. But since we're working with corian here, we don't need a silicone mat. We just need a really light dusting of powdered sugar. You don't want to put too much powdered sugar because it will dry out your fondant. And so, as we've discussed in other segments, water and air, or water and air are your fondant's two biggest enemies. And taking moisture away, which is the air part of it, will mess up your fondant. So you want it to stay as nice and moist as possible, or as soft as possible, and putting too much sugar will suck the moisture, the softness out of your fondant. So you want to do a light dusting to keep it from sticking, but not too much to where it will literally suck the life out of your fondant. Okay, so we have a light little dusting, and we are going to take our fondant that we already colored. It's all in a nice little disc, make it all smooth. I often smooth on my fondant a lot because touching it and smoothing on it keeps it also from drying out. Because if fondant gets too dry, it gets like a little elephant skin looking, outside edge on it. And touching it, like rubbing on it, helps it to maintain its softness. All right, so here we go. We're going to use our non-stick rolling pin and start with our round disc, and then just kind of roll in every direction to keep it round. Because if you end up with like an oblong or a big old piece here and short here, you're gonna have a really difficult time covering that cake in fondant without causing problems. So we want to keep it as round as possible because this is barely enough fondant to cover this cake. And so we want to roll it as round as possible to make sure we're as efficient with it as absolutely possible. Okay. We talked in the last segment about not getting air bubbles in your fondant when you need it, but sometimes it's just impossible. Well, if you're rolling it out and you see some little air bubbles, it's best to pop them with a straight pin before you go any further. So you see your little air bubbles, pop them, and then you can continue. All right, we had quite a few in this one, and that often happens when you put a lot of food coloring and knead it a lot. Okay, so once you get it a little bit rolled out, it's still too thick to cover, but you do not want it to be stuck to the table when you go to pick it up to cover. So we're going to pick it up at this point, and we're going to kind of set it back on some of the other sugar, and we're just kind of gently drag it around, get some of that sugar underneath it so it'll slide nice and easily on your table. But you do not want that sugar on the top of your fondant, only on the bottom. If you get a little bit of dusting on the top, you want to rub it off with your hand. Make sure that it's all nice and soft again, because you can tell when you touch it. It feels very dry to the touch if there's powdered sugar on there, but the more you rub it, the more satiny it feels, and the soft, and it's actually really nice. I like it. So you rub it to get it all nice and smooth again, and make sure that you don't have any on your hands and that you don't have any on your rolling pin. And then you want to roll it out again, because we want this to be between an 1/8 and a 1/16 of an inch thick. You don't want it to be too thick, or it'll make a really bad edge on your cake, and you don't want it to be too thin, or it'll tear on the edge. So, all right, so we're gonna roll it out. And sometimes I'm pushing a little bit hard here, and it's leaving little edges, marks from the rolling pin. But it just depends. Sometimes you have to put a little more weight behind it to make sure you can roll it out. If you do get those little marks in it, just rub it out with your hands. And so now this feels really, really nice. I wish you could feel it through the video, but it feels very, very smooth. If it feels dry at all, you're gonna have difficulty. So just feel it and keep rubbing it until it feels really, really smooth. So that is a gorgeous piece to cover an 8-inch cake that we've got here. All right, so pick it up. You want to be very careful. You want to make sure that your fingernails are all trimmed and short, because fingernails will gouge your fondant worse than anything. So you want to make sure you keep your fingers down and that not up in your fondant. All right, so we're going to be really careful with it here. We're going to fold this one up, put your arm underneath it, keep your fingers down, put your other arm under, and then lift it and drop it on top of the cake. Get some of the extra sugar off your hands. Keep a dry towel handy. You do not want to wipe your hands with a wet towel, because if you touch this, it'll make it sticky. So then make sure there's no air bubbles under the top, and then immediately go around and seal that top edge. Because if this is heavy, it can tear it around the edge if your fondant isn't very strong. So you want to make sure to press all the air out of the top and then immediately seal that top edge of your cake. And then you want to go around and pull those edges out. When you're covering a small cake, the more excess you have, the easier it is to get the folds out. The smaller this is, the harder it is to get the folds out. On a bigger cake, you can have less excess because your curve is bigger and it's easier to get the folds out. So then you just pull your fold out, straighten it out, and then just kind of let the elasticity of the fondant kind of pull back in on itself. All right, so then we've got, and if you're really careful with it, you can just kind of push it around. And you want to use this part of your hand where it's nice and smooth and nothing sharp, because your fingers will do damage. So you want to always make sure your fingers are out and that you are working with this part of your hand to smooth it down. So you have to just be very, very gentle with the cake. Be very, very gentle when touching it. Ooh, see, look what I just did. I just accidentally pushed too hard and made a little crease. So we want to pull that back out and smooth it back out. So we still left a little bit, but if you keep going with it, you could smash it and make a big ugly mess. So this is still not going to be cute, but you know, we can still recover from that. All right. So then you want to be gentle, turn it around, make sure all these are unfolded, and just gentle and kind of pull your fondant as you're pulling it back in, pull toward the section that's already stuck to your cake. And then that's the best way to get these little folds out. See, that looks like it's going to be a fold. You just have to undo it, make sure that you're really careful with it, and then press it back into the cake. All right, and make sure your fingers are out. Use this side of your hand and just kind of smooth it down as best you can. Once you've got it to this point, get one of your smoothers and use the round edge to go around the bottom and kind of seal that bottom edge off. You want to make sure that it's nice and sealed down around the edge. At this point, you don't want your excess fondant to dry out because you can reuse this for something else. And so get your cutter and cut it off right in the edge, right where the cardboard meets the table. So you want to cut that off and then quickly fold it back up, knead it back together. This is going to have some sugar on it from rolling it out, so it will be a little drier than it was the first time, but you just want to get it back in and cover it as quickly as possible. The best way to save your colored fondant is to use a Ziploc freezer bag, not a storage bag, but a freezer bag. And you want to put it back in the bag. Don't seal the bag, because if you seal the bag, you'll seal air into it. So you just kind of push all of the air out, and then set it on the fold, and that's the best way to keep the air out. You do not want to seal it, just wrap it up, and this will keep it nice and soft. Even a sandwich baggie or a storage baggie or a plastic wrap, it'll still dry out through the plastic. You need a freezer bag. All right, so now that you've got that taken care of, you can just worry about this. This is not going to dry out as quickly because it's got the moist cake underneath it. And so you've got more time to work with this once it's already on the cake. So you want to take care of that, put it away, and then come back here. So we did a fairly good job crumb coating this cake, but it's still not completely straight. It's still not completely smooth. So we want it to be really smooth. So we are going to take 2 smoothers at this point and use one to smooth on the top and one to smooth on the sides, or both on the sides at the same time. You don't have to use 2 smoothers. I just kind of like the efficiency of it. Plus, I'll show you in a second how to make really sharp edges with two smoothers. So you just kind of want to rub on it, make sure it's really nice and smooth. And you kind of have to just feel the pressure. You want to push hard enough to where you're going to be able to smooth it, but not so hard where you're going to smash it or put gouges in the side of the cake. So you have to be very, very aware of your edges on your smoother and how hard you're pushing. And so then you just want to go around the edges of the cake and smooth it out. Make sure that there are no ugly spaces on there, and just, I don't know, there are times when I'll rub on a cake for a while to make sure that I've got all of that buttercream underneath doing what I want it to do. Right here, you might be able to see it, there's a bubble forming right here. And as I was pushing this around, it's kind of pushing all the air into that bubble. And so I'm going to take a straight pin and poke it and make sure that there's enough of a hole to where that air can escape. That one's not escaping very well, so I'll make a little bigger hole. And then kind of push that air out. Oh, we've still got a problem here. What causes air bubbles to be underneath your fondant is often if you push down. If it sticks in one place and then it sticks over here and it doesn't stick there, it'll trap air underneath there. So when you're covering the cake in fondant, you want to just make sure you kind of go from top to bottom, make sure all the air is going out the bottom. But, you know, especially for beginners, and even for me sometimes, I'll still get an air bubble in there. But it's pretty easy to fix as long as you're being gentle with it. So just poke it with a straight pin, push the air out, and then smooth it some more. And there you go. Alright, so at this point, we want this edge to be really, really, really smooth. Because the sign of a really sharp, nice cake is how sharp your edges are. If your edge is like all rounded and kind of smashed over, you can say that's not a very nice cake. So we want this to be really, really smooth. So what we're going to do is we're going to put one smoother on the side and one on the top, and we're going to kind of pull them together. And that makes for a very, very nice edge. But you have to be careful so that this edge is not gouging in down here, and that this one is not gouging in up here. So you have to be very, very, very careful and aware. It's like we've still got some air bubbles going on here. All right, here we go. So then just kind of move it around the cake and make it very, very, goodness, I got a lot of air bubbles in this one. Another thing that causes air bubbles is if your crumb coating is not super smooth. If there's little air gaps in the crumb coating, it'll trap air in there underneath the fondant, and as it warms up, it expands and blows a big bubble in your cake. So you have to be careful about that. Alright, so just go around that edge and make that edge very, very sharp and nice. So see, look how much better that turned out from where it started to where we are now finishing it. Alright, so there you go. Actually, and let's go ahead and put this cake on a board. Actually, you know what, never mind. Start it off. And then